Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for attending, and thank you very much for joining us. We're going to be we're delighted to be launching the Scope 3 emissions in FM report, which is setting the foundations for net zero. I will be your host for the day, or for the next hour, should I say? But also joining us in the discussion in the hour ahead, we have Snil Shah, Managing Director of Aclara Advisory and founder of the SFMI, Louise Williamson, who's Managing Director of BAM FM, Reid Cunningham, Strategic Director of BAM FM, who's joining us actually from MX as well, and also Carl Decider, Senior Advisor on Advancing Net Zero from the UK GBC. So we're delighted to have an all-star cast joining us to have this discussion about Scope 3 emissions in the FM sector. Just a very quick word about the SFMI for those of you who don't know about us. The SFMI is the Sustainable Facilities Management Index, and we have been working with the FM sector since 2012 with the mission of embedding sustainability into the operation and the management of the FM sector. We see the FM sector as having a key role to play in sustainability, being the kind of the custodians of the built environment during that operational phase. And they're, the FMs are hands-on the ground at the coalface, so to speak, and they're able to monitor, analyze, data collect, make implementations. And so when it comes to that link with sustainability, there's so much that they can potentially do. So our mission is to really drive sustainability through the sector, understand the issues and solutions surrounding sustainability in the sector, provide a roadmap for the industry as well, and also upskill them and celebrate success of excellence within the sector. And that's what this project is doing today. So firstly, before we get into it, I'd like to thank these organisations for taking part in this kind of launch of part one of our project. Specifically, BAM FM, thank you very much for sponsoring the program and being kind of key inputters into this initial stage. Also from our supporting industry bodies as well, and also a very strong review panel, which includes Carl from UK GBC joining us in the sessions. They've been inputting and review process as we get into stage 2 as well, and also widening out the review. So what are we launching? We are launching the first of 2 reports, which looks into Scope 3 emissions within the FM sector. And that is currently now going to be available on our website as well, on the web page that you see on the screen. Going through the next hour, I'll be conducting the introductions. I'm going to hand over to Louise and Reid, who will be talking about the collaboration between BAM and the SFMI and the benefits that it's bringing them. We're going to have a walk through the report itself as well, and then we'll go into the panel discussion and talk about the challenges and the learnings that we can take forward. Just a very quick thing before we start. The document does get into kind of, I guess, technical elements of greenhouse gas reporting, and I know that Reid in a second will be talking a bit about Scope 3 emissions. So for those of you who are very new to this topic, ultimately, when you calculate your greenhouse gas emissions of your company, you can split it into Scopes 1, Scopes 2, and Scope 3. Scope 1 will be your direct emissions, and those emissions that are emitted on site. So your boilers, for example, are burning gas on site. Your cars are burning fuel within the property that the organisation owns. Scope 2 is the electricity, perhaps heat and cooling. You're purchasing that from an external organisation, but you're still using it on the site of your organisation. And then you've got Scope 3, which is essentially all of these indirect emissions which occur when you're traveling to work, you're traveling on business, you're purchasing goods, capital goods, you have to transport those goods from wherever they're made over to where your organization is. All of these cause emissions, and they're not necessarily under your direct control, but they're indirectly caused because the organization is doing the business that it does. And that's what we're concentrating on, is how do we focus in on those scope 3 emissions and those unknown scope 3 emissions of FM. So with that said, I'm now going to hand over to Louise, who will talk us into the how BAM got involved in the program and the reasons why and the benefits that it's going to bring the sector. So Louise, over to you.
Oh, hello everybody, and welcome to our launch today. If I can have the first slide up. It is really great to be celebrating the launch of this kind of first report from Aclaro and BAM FM. So where we are at the moment, I think COP26 has helped us increase awareness of carbon emissions. Carbon reduction is now much more socially understood. It's talked about. We're expected to be reducing carbon. So it's not new that we're reducing emissions, but there is an increased urgency now, with organisations now setting targets for 2025, 2030 and 2050. So FM companies have already been measuring scope 1, scope 2 emissions for some time, and the FM market and its clients have really woken up and are expecting deliverable results in those areas. But we're now looking at how we can consistently measure those scope 3 emissions that Chris was explaining, which is much more complex, but it is necessary if we're going to support our clients going forward. So technology is also there accelerating this pace of change, and data collection and analysis is going to enable us to be able to design these measures and make it work. So next slide, please. You can see that. So around 30% of greenhouse gas emissions come from the built environment, and 80% of the buildings which will exist in 2050 already exist today. So 15% of emissions are generated from the construction phase of a building, which leaves 85% from the operational phase. And this is where the FM industry needs to step up and be at the heart of greenhouse gas reduction. So at BAM, we are tackling this head on. We have a new business strategy across the whole of our organisation at Group, building a sustainable tomorrow. We're increasing our expertise within our business and expanding into new green sectors, for instance, electric vehicle charging points. So next slide, please. So what we're looking at here is really the FM industry being pivotal in this movement. And we're now well positioned to tackle the kind of inefficient existing building stock problem and looking at retrofit solutions. So what can we actually do? We need to target improvements in 3 areas. We can take ownership and look at our own businesses. We can take responsibility and treat the assets and services we deliver as our own. And we can try and influence and drive the change in behaviour of others. So this consistent measure of the scope 3 emissions is going to be what's key to this. So I'd like to hand over to my colleague Reid now, who's going to talk about BAM's involvement in the report and why we got involved. Thank you.
Thanks, Louise. I'm not sure if you can see me. I'm dialing in from a phone today, and I'm at the MX conference at the Excel Centre in London, where I just actually whetted everybody's appetite with a presentation about the work we've been doing with Sunil and Chris and the team. So I was telling them, if you can't join this call, look forward to reading the report, which will be on the website. Our credentials, Louise has kind of mentioned some of these and our business strategy, but for some time now, BAM has been looking to make a kind of positive future and a positive net benefit to the work that we do and for our customers. We've recorded our emissions in line with CMARS, and for some time now, we've been an A-list company on the CDP list. We're also one of the first contractors to set an approved science-based target for net zero carbon. And we've managed to reduce our own emissions by 45% since 2015. Now, we admit a lot of that activity has been based around the core construction business, but FM is also contributing to that with some of the efforts we've also been making, which I'll come to in a moment on the right-hand side. And BAM is also a signatory to the World Green Building Council Net Zero Carbon Buildings Commitment. And we are part of the UK GBC Advancing Net Zero programme. BAM FM specifically has been participating with the SFMI audit and processes for the last 4 years. Those processes reflect a number of projects every year that we've undertaken with SFMI to improve sustainable practice in our company and with our customers. And this activity is particularly interesting because we're really opening up our effort to the industry and as a wider industry benefit. Our annual projects have improved sustainability and helped us tackle some Scope 1 and Scope 2 items, plus also make some small sort of inquiries into Scope 3. So for Scope 1, we are shifting into EV vehicles. We mentioned a moment ago that fossil fuel or vehicles with internal combustion engines are very much Scope 1. And for the sake of our own emissions, we're looking into rolling out an EV fleet and helping our customers install EV charging for their own activity. In terms of Scope 2, we've been buying green electricity for about 3 years now, and we intend to carry on doing that. When you come to a conference like MX, you do hear some mixed opinion about that, but until there's a better solution, then that is probably the best economic activity we can do. However, what we have also been doing is encouraging and helping many of our customers deliver renewable energy through, for example, photovoltaic panels on their roofs. And in terms of Scope 3, as I say, this is a hard nut to crack. As we've already said, it's a hard nut to crack, but we have started some work with Edinburgh University where we are investigating different sort of carbon intensities of ingredients in our menus. And we're engaging with some customers to change menu cycles and menu options to reduce the carbon in our catering services as an example of a Scope 3 emission that we're actively engaged with. If you jump onto the next slide, please. Great, thank you very much. So our approach with the partnership, what we were trying to offer was obviously some sponsorship and financial support to undertake the work with SFMI, but really trying to identify the value chain in target service lines and relevant service lines to the FM industry. What's also interesting about that is those service lines might vary a little bit in different contract structures and contract types. And the FM sector is full of a wide variety of different delivery methods. We're very keen to focus on how we can practically assess issues in the delivery process. There's no point making this impossible. It has to be practical. And we're looking to provide SFMI with the kind of practical support, the knowledge, the expertise we have in our business that can be used as an example in the early guidance here for stage 1 and in the later stage 2 guidance. So this report is a first step to setting some boundaries, and we look forward to then working in the next stages to develop those into solid guidance and methods, and agreeing sort of metrics and a way forward. So thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Reid, and Louise as well. And yes, we're delighted to be working with yourselves on this in order to provide that guidance for the industry. So what I'm going to do now is take the audience through the report, really. And as Reid said, this is kind of stage 1 of that approach. So the ambitions for us is really to, and I'm going to get into the drivers as well. We're looking at like meeting and exceeding reporting requirements. There have been reporting requirements around net zero, for example, the PPN 0621. There are reporting requirements being driven by the customer base as well into understanding what their supply chain, i.e. FM providers, for example, what are they doing to achieve net zero. And essentially, you know, in order to achieve net zero, one has to understand the full scope of their emissions in order to be able to give that thorough understanding and data-backed approach. So being then able to understand the full impact of, as Reid is saying, the different service lines when you have, you know, catering services, M&E services, you know, reception services, cleaning services, etc., etc. You know, understanding all of the carbon impacts of these and what impact that has on the built environment as well is very important. And then understanding that then also then adds as an upskilling understanding, because you start to collect data in different ways and you start to embed the carbon impact through the organisation and through the service provision end of the organisation. We also aim to give users of this approach like a competitive advantage as well within tenders and contract negotiations, because this then starts to advance the offering that FM has to provide, because you start to have a data-backed approach and you can start to integrate your offerings with a client's net zero services as well. So then you start to kind of create that added value. And then it's promoting greater knowledge and allowing for flexibility and autonomy for the provider. So once you start adding extra value to the customers, then you're then entrusted with kind of greater flexibility in order to meet that. So then that gives more influence and more control and more responsibility, which, you know, feeds into that greater value that the FM service has to offer. And then kind of springing this around into the context of the building life cycle. We're trying to improve the influence that FM has within the building life cycle. I guess a bit of a complicated diagram on the screen, but ultimately this is the current view of what the operational carbon is within the built environment. And really that's kind of fundamentally based on embodied carbon within the building itself, and then also the operational energy use and potentially kind of the utilities use within the building as well. But we think that, you know, FM has a larger impact within this operational use, and there's more that goes into the running of the building. And so that's why we want to be collecting this data and providing this approach, because by showing there is actually a wider impact, you know, Louise mentioned earlier about the 85% of the operational use. It could actually be more of an impact within that operational stage once we start looking at all of the different scope 3 elements that start to come into that operational impact. But without the data, then, you know, we can't improve the influential role that FM has to offer within the built environment. So this is kind of where we are at the moment with the thinking of emissions. We've kind of broken it down into this approach. I mentioned earlier the diagram on the left. This is like your classic greenhouse gas protocol, which is the Bible of greenhouse gas emissions within all organizations. As I mentioned before, it gets broken down into that scopes 1 emissions, which is your direct operational emissions that you have. So company vehicles, company facilities, the energy use, the refrigerant gases, etc., that are used within that building that your organization owns. Then you have the scope 2 stuff. So that's the electricity, again, within your own buildings that you have. And then you have scope 3, but also FM's in a bit of a unique position, because not only does it own, you know, some of its own buildings, a relatively large fleet of vehicles, but it's actually operating within other organizations' buildings. So, you know, the organizations are sending teams out to work on site across a myriad of other organizations. And so, you know, they then have to get there, they then have to, you know, they're ordering goods and services, purchasing goods and services, which are also being used on site as well. And so it's what is the boundary of the FM, and how is that kind of captured? If we look across through the SFMI's annual audits and research that we do, you know, there's I guess a a range of ways in which companies are currently measuring their emissions. So we have, on the small sense, it's those scope 1 and 2 emissions. So that's your kind of your basic carbon footprint. This is organizations which are just focusing on that. You know, this is my boundary, this is my fence line, and I'm just concentrating on this. Then you have some that go a little bit further, and they start to kind of tick off the more easier scope 3 indirect emissions, such as operational waste, travel, business travel, and then sometimes, you know, fuel, which is related to energy activities as well. That's what the FERA stands for. And then you start getting into much more difficult ones, and the key difficult one is the purchased goods and services. This is the carbon impact of all of those goods and also the services which an organization is procuring in order to do its business. And then the outer ring, this is kind of where we get into the really kind of the much more advanced stuff, which hasn't been tackled yet. And this is about the carbon emissions, which are also allocated to the customers as part of the service. And this is kind of where we want to be pushing the industry going into the future, because as we mentioned earlier, you know, there are drivers which is starting to move this way already. So what are those drivers? So we've got regulations, we've got the customers. Now customers are increasing their standards for the supply chains. They have their own reasons for doing that. You know, they've got their own reporting requirements. They have their own pressures from investors. They have, you know, if it's public sector, then they have the government targets which are pushing them. You have investors which are, you know, they're putting pressure on their assets under management, which are then putting pressure on the supply chain, and it starts to cascade down. And then you have employees as well, so it becomes a reputational benefit in order to start to incorporate scope 3 and then push for, you know, these net zero targets. Because ultimately the big thing which companies are going for now is creating a net zero target, and in order to do that you have to have the data which is backing it up. But then also, if you're an FM provider, for example, your customers have got net zero targets, and you can support them with that by taking your organization up the maturity curve. So as I mentioned, you've got increased requirements, which is pushing up the ambition for suppliers. This means that FM providers are being driven to understand their carbon impacts, and that granularity of that information is starting to creep up as well, and it's only going to get kind of more progressive. However, there are lots of different companies which are at different parts of the maturity stages. There's a lot of inconsistency in how carbon emissions are measured as well. And also there's a lack of skilled personnel within the sector and the systems in order to collect accurate data. So when you have links with procurement teams and things, there's a lot of inconsistencies in that. So basically, inaccurate data or gaps in data then mean there's a failure to meet customer expectations. We've got this then has a knock-on effect with the reputation, and for their organizations, kind of FM organizations who are trying to position themselves in the net zero space. And quite frankly, there should be more organizations doing that, because it's showing an evolved position for the FM industry. But then failure to understand the role of emissions within the FM service delivery will essentially lead to a loss of market access through both public and private sectors. So, you know, this is why we're pushing this, is because, you know, this is the future for FM alongside other elements of sustainability. So the objectives of this project, stage 1 consists of 2 stages. Number 1, we're raising the awareness of scope 3 in FM, and also the awareness of FM scope 3 in the built environment. We're going to be delivering the second report in early 2022, preliminarily planned for February time. But we're going to be aiming to deliver a robust methodology, which is going to be kind of guiding organizations to be measuring and collecting the data and measuring that. But then from that point on, we're going to be moving on to stage 2, which is going to be kind of creating a wider collaboration phase, which is where we're going to actually get into some kind of data collection with a group of organizations who want to be, pushing this as part of their agenda and inviting more organizations in to go through kind of live testing of this approach. And then the aim ultimately then is to be collecting data, helping organizations implement this within, and then also taking this data and creating and mapping out the decarbonisation journey for different services within the industry. So it's quite exciting, and there's a lot to do, and there are organizations at different maturity stages out there. But the aim of this project is to bring organizations along that journey. So I mentioned about a maturity curve. This is one that we use within the report itself. If you look at the y-axis, we've got kind of, if you remember that diagram, which is the circles, that's essentially representing those circles stage. And then the x-axis is talking about granularity of data collection. So here we're looking at, emissions from the FM organizational function. So this is kind of like the in-house kind of the in-house emissions of that FM organization. If you're an FM provider, then it's your immediate operational boundary. And then the second kind of level is to then start to break down the different service lines and to understand emissions from a different service level perspective. And then the aim then is to go further and actually take it down to that client level, which again, is a challenging thing because there's a lot of systems and processes that's going to be needed in order to get to that point. But ultimately, report 1 is really settling within that kind of on the cusp of the service level perspective. With the aim, then we go into report 2, and then we're really going to start to break down into some key service levels in order to give that understanding of what emissions can look like within that, with what scope 3 emissions can look like, as we then start to build our way up the maturity curve. So I guess reiterating, then we've got, report 1 is really an awareness and upskilling approach. So encouraging you to, read through, understand the drivers, understanding the business opportunities, and really get your organization on board, as well as giving you a bit of an insight into the kind of data that you need to be collecting as well, and some kind of understanding of the boundaries which are available. And then the report into scope 2 is, the report number 2 is talking about the guidance and approach that we're going to be recommending. So kind of actually taking you on a learning journey through that. And then we start getting into the more advanced stuff after that. So as you look through the document, as you get through into the kind of the meat and bones of, the breakdown of emissions, you'll be confronted by a couple of tables within that. So this initial one is looking at scopes 1 and 2 primarily. And here what we do is we break it down into a definition of the category and the definition of what's the scope is. These are all aligned with the greenhouse gas protocol as well, because obviously we don't want to be going off in our own separate direction when doing this, and we're aligning it with the international standards of the greenhouse gas protocol corporate accounting standard. Then what we've done is we've conducted kind of a desktop relevance assessment, so a typical red, amber, green approach, which is where we're kind of saying, what is this relevant to the FM industry or the FM organization, providing that kind of high level relevance assessment. Then after that, we're starting to get into how is the definition from the greenhouse gas protocol then applied to the FM kind of operations. So again, this is kind of the in-house operations of the organization, before then starting to get into what does this particular definition look like if we're looking at the FM working on the service level side. So we're starting to look at what it's related to when it comes to working on site with it for customers, for example. And if I go into the next screen, this kind of then starts to break down into the scope 3 section of the greenhouse gas protocol. So scope 3 is categorized into 15 different criteria or categories. which all start to play a broad role in your indirect emissions. So the first category would be purchased goods and services. So from according to the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, this is described as or defined as the extraction, production and transportation of goods and services purchased or acquired by the reporting company within the reporting year, which are otherwise not categorized within other particular categories. So from a kind of an FM internal operations perspective, here we're looking at those goods and services which are purchased to support the central functions of the management of the organization. So it could be procuring stationery for the organization, it could be electronic equipment. However, if those if the organization defines laptops, for example, as capital goods, then obviously they would then go into category 2, because this is talking about the capital goods in the organization. So again, we've gone through this relevance assessment, and as I mentioned, there are 15 different categories within the Scope 3 greenhouse gas protocol, and we've again done that high level relevance, but we are looking at this from a general FM perspective within this particular report. In the next report, we are going to then start to delve down into that different service level approach. So, catering could be different to M&E, for example, or the cleaning services. And so we are looking at this from that kind of generalized approach. And then also, just to give organizations a bit of a head start, we're also, and we want them to start thinking about the data level collection requirements. So here we start to give a bit of a breakdown into what kind of data an organization will need in order to start calculating these elements. So, what we're really starting to do is give organizations that kind of instruction to start to dive down, start to think, okay, where am I on this maturity curve? What do I understand? What kind of data can I collect? And then ultimately, we are also looking for your feedback as well. So we want organizations to be reading the reports and then using our feedback form on our website in order to kind of fill out the questionnaire and start to input into this, because this is a collaborative approach. We've come out with this kind of initial soft launch of report 1, but then also we will be adding that with further detail, and we can also go back and start to amend and start to bring it more to make amends based on the industry feedback. So I think here's like an example of the challenges that we have ahead of us, really, especially when starting to look ahead into that kind of contractual level. For example, we may have a catering service, but then there are different examples of contracts. For example, one might be a restrictive contract whereby the client dictates what kind of food is to be procured within the service, and the costs of that and all of the restrictions which go around the service that's being provided. However, taking this kind of approach whereby we're trying to minimize carbon, it actually then starts to feed into the flexibility of the contract in the future, because if the FM is able to use their zero carbon kind of pathway, they can then start to say, they can then start to make recommendations and influence the kind of service that's being provided, which then gives them a kind of more of a guidance and responsibility role within the contract. So therefore, you actually start to have more flexible contracts, and the value can actually start to improve as well, because you're not only starting to achieve carbon targets, but then also you're starting to provide, quality as well as a reduced environmental impact. So I think that's me over with now. So I'm going to hand over to Sunil, who's going to take us through a panel discussion.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you very much, Chris. And I think as has been requested, if you have any questions, please send them through either in chat function or in Q&A. And then we can make sure that they're put forward to the panelists as well. Before I go into the panel discussion, just a quick recap and an overview. So Louise and Reid started off talking around 85% of carbon emissions coming from the operational phase. And so there is this massive role that FM has, and a pivotal role, to tackle that inefficient existing stock. Coupled with some of the comments that Chris was raising around the role of FM in that built environment and across the range there, is then also about the role that FM has and others in that built environment to actually share knowledge and to collaborate and communicate. So all of that then helps as a collective to be able to reduce those emissions. So there is that role that FM has to be able to influence beyond its own operations and activities, the customers it's serving, but also elsewhere within that value chain. For ourselves as a Claro, we're involved in a number of net zero projects for large multinationals through to SMEs, public sector, and some charity bodies. Some of our members we've joined in with the UKGBC, the World Green Building Council programme as well. I think the general learnings that we've got from that is typically the majority of organisations underestimate the amount of work that's necessary to get to grips with their scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions. There is commonly a lack of data and significant data gaps. But what we also find is that the process re-energises teams. It resets the expectations, but it actually starts to engage further and drives further progress and movement because they see the tangible change that can come out from this. There's some real positives in going through this process. Okay. So I've got some questions coming through as well. So if I start off, first question, this will be, so if I can go in the order of, first of all, Reid, then Carl, and then Chris. In terms of what are the challenges the sector faces to be able to implement the Scope 3 plans that have been discussed today? Reid, if I could start with you. Yeah. Reid, you're still on mute.
There you go. Can you hear me now?
Yep, I thought we could go the whole session without saying that.
No, never. I think that the challenge is, it's hard to know where to start. You know, I think Chris has touched on some of them. You know, just the kind of the variety of different service lines and things. But I suppose from a contractor's point of view, you know, just on that for a moment, I suppose engaging with our supply chain can be quite challenging. It's quite a large supply chain. It's UK wide, where we have tried in the past to maybe avoid central purchasing, so that we're trying to localize procurement and you know, bring benefits to local communities. Then actually the problem gets a little bit bigger because you're dealing with smaller enterprises often and more of them. So it's important that we get out to them so that we can start to grab the data that they have in their possession that we might need. And I think also another situation, you know, is about educating and enlightening our own teams so that they understand why we're doing this and why we might be asking them to make slightly different decisions and give us slightly different information too. So there's a couple of examples. One industry example I think that is pervasive is FM contracts can be quite short, and with a short mobilization, and you know, before you've really got your foot under the table, you're already thinking about demobilizing sometimes. Then bedding in these sorts of arrangements, it could also be a challenge. Not an insurmountable one where there's good guidance and consistency, but to get started, it could be quite a challenge, I think. I don't know if those are reasonable.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Reid. Carl?
Thanks, Neil, and good to be here chatting about Scope 3 emissions. Thanks for having me along. I think one of the key challenges, Reid's already kind of touched on it, is trying to just wrap people's heads around Scope 3 emissions. It can be quite overwhelming. Starting to talk about the greenhouse gas protocol, 15 categories, looking at your supply chain, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's important to firstly identify the key drivers for why it is important for an FM organization. I think the report's done a really good job at kind of outlining some of those benefits and trying to kind of demystify exactly what scope 3 emissions are. I think the challenge can also be that it might be assumed that this is something that you can achieve overnight, or it's kind of a short-term achievement, whereas in reality, it's going to be a bit of a marathon. You're going to have to firstly start with some easy wins, kind of broaden your data set, improve your collection over time. It's not something that's going to be easy to achieve in the first instance, but it's going to be an iterative process that will reap benefits further down the line. So I think making sure that you have that strategic level perspective front and foremost is important. Otherwise, it can be a bit demoralizing when you have to do all this data collection for little gain. So there's a few challenges that I feel are relevant.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you very much, Carl. And Chris, for yourself? I think Chris has left us, so it's going to get an easy time. Okay, I'll come back to Chris on that one later.
He's having some minor Wi-Fi issues, so come back to him in a moment, I think.
Okay. In terms of then looking at FM's role in the wider built environment, so the FM sector is at the end. It's the 60-year lifetime of a building. Anything that can go wrong then ends up in the lap of the property team, the FM team afterwards. What's the lessons that could be learned from the wider built environment who have started the journey on net zero and understanding its impacts and emissions earlier? And historically, what's the lessons that can come from the wider built environment that the FM sector can learn from? Carl, if I can ask you that first.
Sure. Yeah, I think it's going to be a case of breaking down silos. It's funny how you say FM's kind of at the end of the value chain, but what we need to have happen now to deliver kind of on our net zero commitments is widespread collaboration, so that every member along the value chain feels empowered and feels engaged to be working on a common agenda. I think as was set out in the presentation, a lot of kind of property owners, investors are now setting net zero targets, and ultimately they're going to need to lean on their supply chain, their value chain to deliver on that. So specifically the FM sector, because the FM role is critical to actually implementation on the ground. So I think it is going to be a case of breaking down barriers, widespread collaboration. I think Scope 3 reporting kind of helps break down some of those barriers as well. It kind of forces one stakeholder to talk to others in their supply chain. So yeah, it's a great time to come at this collectively.
Yeah, fantastic. And Reid, from yourself? Yeah, you're on mute again, Reid. I think we've lost Reid as well now. We're doing well on Wi-Fi at the minute, aren't we? Okay.
Chris is back.
Yeah. Hello, Chris. Louise, I don't know if you wanted to mention anything there around, so some of the parts that Reid was also mentioning was around the length of contracts in terms and the role that a client would have with the FM clients. Don't know if you wanted to add anything on that side and the relationships that would be needed to be able to support what Carl was talking about, which is this value chain role.
Sorry, can you hear me now? Yeah, I'm very sorry. I'm highly mobile. So I think for an example from the other industries is that they've been getting really good at grabbing a lot of data, and BIM and digital technologies have really revolutionized their sectors. So I think there's opportunities for us to assimilate that, not just asset data, which is easy, but service, data about the services. I think, we can learn a lot from that.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. And Chris, whilst you're away, we decided to set you a particularly difficult question as well. So this was just
catch me up.
Yeah. No, it was around the challenges that the sector's facing, but also, I guess, from your role looking at the SFMI, you get an industry and a sectoral view of what's going on. What's your feeling in terms of where the sector is at the minute?
So the sector is, I guess, it's quite spread out. So you've got a group of organisations who they understand the customer need for net zero, and they understand that there's an opportunity for them to be integrating into that. And they've kind of brought out a couple of different business models which help them to shape themselves towards those customer needs, but then also start to then integrate the services into that need for net zero as well. In terms of kind of the data backing that, I think there's all organizations need to go on that customer journey and curve, because it's difficult to be collecting so much data on a granular level as well. And then it's about, as Reid said at the very beginning, how practical is it to be collecting data? But obviously we need to understand the processes involved to collect information. And then you've obviously got a raft of companies who, they see the needs, they kind of claim that they can do it. I guess it's whether, they have the potential to do that, or, it could actually be potentially a marketing gimmick. And then I think there's obviously another group of companies who, I guess aren't going down that journey, basically. That's kind of what we see from the SFMI.
Yeah, okay. I think broadly that's similar. You'll have the leaders in there who are doing the right thing, communicating effectively, being transparent. You'll have others who just haven't started their journey yet, but you'll always have those that are using it as that PR, the greenwashing element, and that's the challenge that I think every sector faces as well. We're not alone in that one. So, Louise, if I can come back to you on that question that I was asking you earlier on, which is, Reid mentioned about the challenge that you have in terms of short contract lengths and so on. What does that look like in terms of trying to drive forward some of these longer term plans, having the drive, the ability to influence sustainability, but having these short term contracts? How do you approach that in terms of the conversations and the way that you deliver your contracts? Yeah. Sorry, Louise, you're on mute. Yeah.
Sorry. You try to be considerate, don't you? So you mute, so you're not making all the background noise. There you go. So no, I was saying, some of our contracts, we can take a lot of ownership because we have very long-term PFI contracts. We've got a long time to influence our customers over that term of contract. So some of them are easier than others, but these short-term contracts, you've got to say, well, what is within your remit? What can you, really take responsibility for? And what is actually, it's an ongoing influencing exercise, and you would hope that the person who has the contract after you is going to pick up the same thing. And you've got to do the right thing, whatever, but that makes it very difficult to make a change if, these are very short-term contracts. So potentially the longer-term contracts where the customer's there and they will invest over a period of time are the ones where they're going to make the biggest difference. And the government contracts are...
Is this the right one?
I don't know where I am.
When you want him to be on mute, he's not.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thanks, Reid.
But yeah, it is a challenge. Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. So
my construction colleagues have, they have short-term contracts, but they're just focusing on the construction element, and they're looking at embodied carbon, and they're doing the measures, and they've got the data sets there, and they are really driving ahead, even though, they are just building something over a period of 2 or 3 years. So, we surely should be able to learn from them and adapt that. If you've got a short-term contract, look what you can do and get on with it.
Yeah. Fantastic. So yes, there's still some deliverables that can come out from that. Yeah. So it's a change in mindset as well. Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you. And I'm conscious of the time as well. So the last question that I've got, and again, if I can ask for a short answer from everyone, is how can the FM sector? So it's almost what's the one thing that the FM sector can do to be able to lead on those solutions, to be able to take forwards the program around net zero. Reid, if I could start with you.
Maybe not.
Okay, too difficult a question there. Chris, I'll go to you then. Yeah, you're on mute as well.
Can I say the one thing that I think the industry needs to do is to measure its full emissions inventory. So those direct and indirect emissions, whether it be on a basic level at the beginning, but then understanding what are the requirements to improve the data quality over time, and then improve the ability to gather granular data as well over time.
Yeah. Okay, Carl?
And reinforce Chris's point, is exactly what I was going to say. You can't manage what you don't measure. So I think importantly, taking stock of exactly what FM has influence over, understanding where those big ticket items are, and then driving that down is going to be key, but you can't make that first step unless you have a good understanding of where your emissions lie.
Yeah.
So I think measurement's the first and most important step.
Yeah. Brilliant. Louise?
Agree with the measures, but second to that is collaboration, because we can't do this in little silos. If we come together as an industry, we start sharing what we do and sharing data, then we can move this on much, much faster. So for me, it's yes, we'll measure it, we all measure it, but we've got to collaborate.
Yeah, fantastic. And Reid, last word for you?
Yeah, I'm back. Sorry about that. I keep pushing the wrong buttons. I don't actually know I've got much to add. I think those are the two key points. I think commitment. I think there has to be. You have to dive in with both feet on this. It's not, but otherwise.
Okay, you went a bit Dalek-y towards the end.
Oh,
I think, yeah.
Sorry.
That's all right. That's all right. So I think if I can put it as we've got commitment, we've got collaboration, and we've got calculate footprint. So there's 3 C's that have come out from it. So that sounds quite good as well, doesn't it? That's the 3 key things to take on. Fantastic. Chris, back to you.
Thank you very much. Okay. So the report is live now on our website. So I do encourage you to download it. But also I would love it. We would love it as a group if you were to provide feedback and show your kind of interest in the project as well in general. Because as I mentioned, this is stage 1, building the awareness, but obviously we want to gain feedback because FM is a very broad industry with lots of different kind of service environments. So we want to ensure that we are kind of catering for all, should we say, excuse the pun of catering. And yeah, so the feedback approach, the feedback form will be available through December as well, and then we'll be taking that on and we'll be using that in order to develop into the next stage. Also, as a final kind of word as well, if you're interested in the SFMI and what we're doing, there is another webinar event on the 30th of November, which is based on our SFMI E-Awards, which is essentially celebrating the success of leading FM providers and companies in the year of 2021, understanding the challenges and the successes that the FM providers have faced in building up that maturity curve to become kind of truly sustainable FM providers. So if you're interested in that, then you'll find a link in the comments box. I'm hoping my colleague Maddie will pop that in. If not, please, you'll find it on our social media channels as well. So thank you very much to all of our panelists for joining us today. Thank you very much for your insights and obviously being part of the project. And also for those companies who participated in the review approach, and also for you for joining us through the event as well. My apologies for my internet patching out partway through, but thank you very much, everybody, and have a good day.